in Hillsborough County for the University of Florida, and we coordinate these monthly Extension Master Gardener Coordinator online discussions. And in just a few minutes, we're going to have Tim talk to us about work-life balance, and I'll share a little personal anecdote at the beginning of why this is so ironic today. But before we get started, I do want to let you guys know our agenda and a few announcements. So we have some initial announcements. Tim will give us a discussion that'll run about 30 minutes or so with time for Q&A, and then we'll do a wrap-up at the end. A couple of announcements. There will be a SWOT analysis survey sent out very soon from the Extension Master Gardener National Committee. If you see that, they're looking, of course, for what you feel as coordinators are strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats of the Extension Master Gardener Coordinator National Committee, and any of your feedback will be very helpful. So be sure to fill out that survey when we get it by email through the listserv. The National Extension Master Gardener Repository is also looking for reviewers, and in the EMG News Blast, you can find information on how to sign up to be a reviewer, and you'll also find information on the link to presentations from the 2018 Extension Master Gardener Coordinator Conference in Madison, Wisconsin. So those presentations are all excellent. I was able to attend that conference and I learned a lot, and those presentations have mostly all been posted online. And last but not least, the NIFA survey for niche is going to also, I think that has been sent out, and they're looking for our feedback by November 30th. So if you're on the Extension Master Gardener Coordinator listserv, you'll be receiving this information, but if you have any questions or want to figure out how to find these, just send me an email and I can let you know how to sign up for that. So for some of our upcoming presentations in December, we're going to plan for 2019. I'd like to invite all of you on the call. If you have a program that you want to highlight, something that you're doing great in your county, and you are looking to do a national presentation, please contact me and we can fit you in for a month next year. Next month in December, we have Wayne Hobbs, who's also from the University of Florida, and he's going to talk to us about an online program or training that he created for Master Gardeners. And the thing I like about Wayne's presentation is that he tried to do what a lot of us do with the online classes, but as you know, with online training, it sometimes is difficult to get it to run smoothly, and he didn't quite get some of the results he wanted. So he's going to share a lot of the successes and challenges with us of creating that online training tool. And then in January, we have Pam Bennett. She's from Ohio State, and she's going to talk about getting ahead by letting go. So if you could all take a moment to write in the chat box and let us know what state you're from. All right, so we know we have some folks from Florida. We have Nebraska, Texas. We know this is Brock's first time on the call, and Brock, we thank you for being here. Indiana, good. Washington, New Hampshire. All right, good group on the call today. Okay. And now we're going to go ahead and get into our presentation with Tim Tanner. And Tim is from Ohio State University Extension. He is the acting associate state 4-H leader, the area leader, and the 4-H educator. And today he's going to talk to us about work-life balance and extension, culture matters. And I told you all I would share an anecdote with you. Ironically, when I first completed the survey that Tim sent out and asked him to be a speaker for us, I thought this is going to be a great thing for us to learn some tips, and I could definitely use it in my life. Well, fast forward a few months later, and now it's November, and I'm here in the Florida Keys. My family are all out snorkeling. I'm doing a webinar and working on my annual report to UF. Today at lunch, everybody had, daiquiris, and I'm like, not yet. So apparently I haven't learned too much yet, and I'm hoping I could take away some tips that Tim's going to share with us. And of course, I appreciate all of you being on the call, and we will record this presentation for access later. So Tim, if you're ready, you can go ahead and start.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. And again,
welcome.
It's good to be with everyone today. Glad that you can hear me there. And we will have a few more chat box options as we go through the presentation. I just wanted to let folks know that you'll have some opportunities to participate as we go along. And certainly if you have questions as we go along, maybe hold those to the end. Sometimes it's hard to monitor chat while you're trying to speak on Zoom. But again, I appreciate being here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the survey that I put out late January, early February of this year that so many of you participated in, and kind of where we go from here. So today's presentation is just going to go briefly through kind of the definition I'll be using of work-life balance, the importance of it for extension, some of the things we've tried in the past that have worked or not worked as well as we would like, and then kind of get into the particulars of the study itself and some of the findings that might be of most interest to folks on the call today. So with that, let's get started with the definition. And there are many definitions of work-life balance that exist in the literature, and the one that made the most sense for extension land was this one. Perceived state of balance between work and the rest of life. And as you think about that, one of the things we know about extension work is that it's very fluid. Rarely are we doing the same thing from month to month, from year to year. We have a lot of variety in our lives, and that's one of the great things about the job. It also can make it challenging to stay on balance or to be able to maintain the things we would like to maintain outside of work. And so this perceived piece, I think, is important to think about as we go forward. As we look at the importance of it for extension and other folks, I broke it down into kind of three main categories. We would recognize that this isn't just something overall that is great for us, but maybe not so great for the universities we serve, or vice versa. When you look at for the universities that we work for, one of the great benefits is that the more balanced we are, the more creative we are. And if there's one thing that extension has been known for a long time, is we are the problem-solving wing of the university in a lot of ways. We're the boots on the ground. And if we don't have kind of our sharp minds about us, we're not going to be as useful as we need to be. The second piece there is productivity. Now, this one is a mild correlation, but it is to the positive side. And so, believe it or not, we are more productive the less that we work. There's some great findings out there, and if you want to read the 100 and some odd page dissertation that this gets into, you're going to spend a little bit more time reading about this. But one of the great findings that I notice is that beyond 54 hours a week, our productivity tails off significantly. It's as if we might as well not even work beyond that point in time. And of course, that's an average. And so that's something to think about when, a number of us are probably working between that, 45 to 60 hour work week more frequently than we would like to admit. And as research-based folks, we probably best not be doing that too often. And then the third piece from an employer standpoint is, job retention. The greater emphasis on work-life balance and the more perceived work-life balance that employees have, the more likely they are to retain with the organizations they serve. There are also some great benefits for us as employees. Our satisfaction improves. That's kind of a no-brainer in a lot of ways. If we don't feel like work is taking too much out of us, we're probably more likely to be happy. There's also some social health aspects to this as well. When we're able to talk about the things we enjoy in life beyond work, with our colleagues in the office or across the state or nation, that improves our social health as well if we don't feel like we have to sequester some of those thoughts. So I enjoy the fact that Nicole is in the Florida Keys this afternoon, and that in approximately 51 minutes, she will be signing off and enjoying her life for the next 4.5 days. So that'll be great. And then the other piece is personal wellness. It kind of goes hand in hand. We know a lot about mental health now that we didn't 10, 15 years ago for the workplace, but it also relates to physical health as well. When we don't have that stress, obviously our heart health and other things are in good shape. So there are some benefits to us. I also wanted to spend a little bit of time here talking about extension specifically, because there are some parts to the research out there that are very narrowly focused on extension. Not as much as I would have liked as I was writing the dissertation, but enough that I thought it was interesting to share. And the first is that we are only moderately satisfied with our jobs. That is the norm across the country. So, we're kind of normal in a lot of ways with other professions, but I think we can do better. And I think that when you look at a lot of times in extension, we're trying to help others improve their lives. Sometimes it's difficult to do that if we don't feel like our lives are doing fairly well themselves. And so I would argue that in some regards, we should be more towards the high end of job satisfaction than what we are today. And then the second piece is there are very few roles within extension that we can afford to turn over quickly. Not just because I have a 4-H background and know that more specifically, but most of the roles that we have in extension require some relationship building. They require the community getting to know you a good deal, building those networks of agencies that you can partner with on projects, so on and so forth. And so when we turn over employees, it's much more difficult for us to get that position back up and running than what it might be for, say, a third grade public school teacher, where it's a new crop of kids the next year, and in a lot of ways, they don't know that much has changed. And so for extension specifically, if we can keep that job satisfaction and keep folks on board, work-life balance is a helpful piece for that. So let's move into our first poll. I'd be interested to hear, some of you are on the call because you're always on the call, and others maybe were specifically interested in the topic. So if you have some things to throw in the chat box here, what is your biggest work-life balance challenge that you're facing at this moment? I appreciate you continuing to chime into the chat box there. One of the things I wanted to offer today, by no means am I perfect. And certainly as I began the process of undertaking a PhD and then got asked to do a number of different roles in Ohio here, work-life balance changed for me a great deal. But one of the things I enjoy doing is helping folks work through their challenges individually. Yeah, Brock, we appreciate your need for more fishing time there. And so if you want to reach out to me offline, I'd be happy to do that kind of on our own time to maybe share some of the things that I have learned, but also what the research says. As far as I saw one person here mentioned, it's hard learning how to say no. And there's actually some great strategies that are out there for learning how to do that better. It's not just, kind of a willpower based thing a lot of the time. So if you have interest in that, I'm happy to serve as a resource person, even beyond the call. And I appreciate your sharing at this point in time. There we go. So looking a little bit at what Extension has tried thus far, one of the great things is we tend to be on the forefront of identifying challenges within society. And this particular issue was no different. Coming into the early 1980s, as women were hitting the workforce in full stride for the first time in our history, Extension quickly recognized that that was changing family dynamics in a way that maybe folks had not anticipated or were not prepared for. And so we used ourselves in a lot of ways as guinea pigs early on to have that discussion to support our clientele. From there, then, we came up with some strategies in Extension that focused a lot on HR policies, so things like family medical leave, in some places, some subsidies for childcare and those sorts of things. And then also, kind of the other side of the aisle was to work on self-help. So we began to see as early as 1984, 87, some self-help seminars from a variety of states that were looking at this issue, trying to figure out how to help us help ourselves, right? And you've probably been to a number of these sessions still today as you go to national meetings, state extension conferences, and so forth. Unfortunately, as we got towards the tail end of the millennium there, a group of researchers discovered that HR policy and the self-help side were not enough. It wasn't getting the job done of actually moving the needle of helping us be better at improving work-life balance and extension. And they posited that organizational culture and the influence of our leaders might be the crucial kind of next step to investigate, to look at. Unfortunately, as we often get busy, we kind of took that. We recognized that it was probably true, but no one went out and decided to really dig into whether it was true or not. And as I was looking at what dissertation might be meaningful to me, I faced the challenge of being a mentor to some neighboring colleagues in 4-H land here in Ohio, and some folks that I really would have liked to see stick around and continue to work for extension were not able to make it work from a life perspective. And that kind of was my personal moment where I wanted to investigate this issue a little bit further. So as far as my study goes, I'm not going to go into every nitty-gritty detail, because that would take a lot longer than the half hour we want to spend today. But just briefly, it was put out to all of our states nationwide that have a middle leadership structure. And so in many states, it would have the title of something akin to a district director, a regional director, or so forth. So all of the states that had that kind of a supervisory structure were invited to participate. 13 of those states did end up getting to participate in a full and kind of meaningful way. And as you can see there at the bottom of the screen, the response rate was very strong for a nationwide survey. And I certainly appreciate the folks on the call and others who took the time. It means a lot for sure to me. The focus of my research specifically was on the influence of transformational middle leaders, as well as organizational culture, on work-life balance. Again, going back to kind of early 2000s and what we posited might be the cause or reasons that we could improve some things. So I just wanted to share briefly a couple of some of the instrument questions from each of the different survey instrument components. So for example, as it relates to culture, a few of the questions would be, my organization values measures to promote work-life balance amongst employees. Or my supervisor sets a good example of work-life balance. At my organization, employees are informed about the programs and policies that could help them with work-life balance. As we look at work-life balance itself, some of the questions, and we'll get to this later when we look at the model chart, some of the questions were things like, my personal life drains me of energy for work, or things like, my work suffers because of my personal life. Just very basic questions, getting folks to be kind of honest and transparent on a scale range. And then on the transformational leadership side, for those that haven't spent a lot of time or maybe don't live underneath the tutelage of a transformational leader, the biggest way to maybe describe what that looks like compared to the command and control types of leaders is that transformational leaders tend to care about the relationship with the employee. They're going to try to motivate your performance by caring for you and your individual needs, as opposed to just looking at outcomes and productivity and those sorts of things. And of course, there's a whole body of research out there showing that this is the direction we ought to be heading. And in many of our states, that is the direction that we have already gone. And so I just wanted to share that a little bit for folks that maybe didn't have as much of a history with some of these terms. So when we get into, what the research ended up showing us, you never know, right? You take what the literature suggests, you put it through its paces and see where things shake out. So on the positive side, a very clear connection, if you're looking at this model, is that we can see that those middle leaders, the more transformational that they are, the more influence they have on work-life balance culture. And you can see that that's a moderately positive relationship there on the left side of the screen. There's a lot of arrows on the bottom half of the screen there, and so I'm going to do my best to explain what all of that is. Those three dimensions with all of the letters over there on the far right-hand side are just three different dimensions of work-life balance, okay? So the top one is work interference with personal life. The middle one is the reverse of that, personal life interference with work. And then the bottom one is work personal life enhancement. And it's a validated scale that kind of showcases the three different pieces that make up work-life balance overall. And the reason they're divided out is because they may help us to ferret out some different types of information based on each one. So what you can see is that as far as a direct relationship, the level of transformationalness within the leadership or within our middle leaders does not have that much of an impact on work-life balance directly. But what you can also see is that it has a significant impact if we go through our cultural mechanisms within the office, within the region, so on and so forth. That's probably not surprising to those of us that have been around Extension for a little while, because if we don't feel as though the culture at large is kind of supporting what our administrators are saying or sharing, we aren't as likely to adopt those new practices and behaviors and lifestyle changes and so on and so forth. And so in a lot of ways, I think this confirms kind of maybe what many of us had suspected or would have suspected, but it's nice that we have some data to kind of showcase that. Now I'm going to get into some kind of take-home points that go beyond just this kind of overview piece here. But before we do that, I want to give you an opportunity to talk about some fun things. Now, my hope here is that you're not going to say, required family Christmas with the in-laws, okay? When I ask for what your next real vacation is, I'm talking about something you hope to do. And I know that Brock's is going to include fishing, so I'm looking forward to our responses here. Seeing a lot of good feedback here in the chat, and I'll start with some of the earliest responses there. It is very common in Extension for us not to have a plan or maybe some forethought as to where our next vacation will be. And when you dig into the research behind that, very little of it has to do with funding, because in general, we tend to have enough money to have taken a decent vacation. Not always, especially folks that are kind of early in their careers. But mostly it's because we don't feel like we can step away for that long. And we'll showcase that here in a few slides at how few of our peers are in fact taking those larger vacations. One of the reasons I like to share this is because in my area leader role, one of the pieces I do each year is work with folks as part of their annual performance plan to actually write down, where their 1 week or 2 week or whatever the case may be, vacations are going to be this year. Because the simple act of doing it and kind of treating it as if it's a performance goal begins to give us a little bit more license, I've found, to make that happen. So if that's a strategy that works for you, I would encourage it. I did see a number of other good places that folks have traveled to recently or are looking forward to, and I may steal some of those as time goes along here. One of the things that my family does is we have decided that over a 10-year period of time, we're going to try to go to each national park in the United States, outside of the ones that cost lots and lots of money to get to, such as the one down there in the Florida Keys, which is a $150 one-way ferry trip. So don't want to do that. But at any rate, this year's trip just wrapped up about 2 months ago, and we were able to get up into the Great Northeast. We had not been to that area before. And so this is Cape Breton Highlands National Park. It's the Skyline Trail. It's kind of a famous landmark up there. And it was most definitely worth the time. And one of the things we find that when we're on vacation is once we're actually gone, once we're actually there, and we don't have to host webinars from the Florida Keys, once we get to that point in time, we can truly get lost. We can truly forget about work. And when we get back to work, we're that much more revitalized and ready to go. And again, I share this because we as extension professionals are creative. We are the problem-solving wing of the university. And so if we're constantly operating on maintenance mode, if we're fried, it's not going to serve our universities very well for us to kind of live in that state. And so I wanted to just share a brief picture there of a recent trip that I have had. So this may be the section that most of you were waiting for. Some of the pieces that were some kind of auxiliary questions on the survey that related more to extension work. We'll start at the top, and I'll just kind of work my way through these. The first one is that work interference with personal life was rated as moderately poor. And within that specifically, our own self-care and the challenges we face at home rated the most difficult or the most challenging for us. That wasn't very surprising for me, but I think seeing it in black and white is helpful, and noting that it's pretty common for us. And the other piece to that is nationwide, when you compare us to other organizations, for us to be ranked as moderately poor puts us quite a bit below the average. That was the one specific part of work-life balance that we struggle with that others maybe don't struggle with quite as much. And so keep that in mind. If you're facing that, it's good to know that you're facing it with others, but it also shows that we have, a great deal of work to do in that particular sector there. Some of the pieces that maybe surprised, the numbers were maybe a little higher than I expected them to be. 44% of us used less than half of our allotted vacation last year. I've not met too many people that use all of their vacation, and some of that is because we do have pretty generous vacation packages with most of our universities, and it's often hard, to come up with enough ways to use that vacation. But to not be using at least half of that, which means in most of our universities we're not using at least 7.5 to 10 days. Again, that's putting us in a position of, are we fresh? Are we able to be the best that we need to be for our systems? And then on a more day-to-day basis, 60% of us are not getting enough sleep. And of course, this is a self-assessment survey, so it's probably even a little bit worse than that, right? Because some of us are going to be a little bit more friendly to ourselves in judgment than if we had like a sleep journal or that kind of a thing. So again, if we're going into the average, extension office at 9 o'clock in the morning, and less than half of us have had enough sleep the night before, what is that doing? What does that do to office culture, morale, and those kinds of things? And does it allow us to be, the professionals we want to be? So just a couple of things I thought that might be interesting there for folks to hear. On the good side, because, we never want to end with all of the sad stuff there, we do have leaders that are more transformational than other organizations right now. We have made that transition, not everywhere, but statistically, we have made that transition nationwide to that kind of that caring leader type. And so we are well positioned as we move forward to begin to make the cultural changes that are necessary. We just, need to begin that process or continue that process in some places. The one piece that maybe fell a little bit short on the transformational side was intellectual stimulation. I share that purely as a sometimes, especially if you were to look back at the survey and know all of the questions on there, this is the one that would be most overlooked if you were a leader. It'd be the one when you focus on the day to day and you focus on maybe some performance based issues, but we don't always spend time as leaders, encouraging somebody to read a great book, or here's a great article I saw online. Have you checked this out lately? We don't do that as much as we could because it tends to be, lower down the list of our priorities. And so I would encourage us to spend a little bit more time on that for those of us that are, in some version of a middle leader type of role or above. My closing thought then, and then I'll open it up to the variety of questions that folks may have coming out of this. As you can see from before, those self-help trainings, the HR policies, they have been helpful. Certainly we don't want to go back to the 1970s and the policies that we had there and the lack of support that we had within our organizations. But they have also been inadequate. We are still moderately poor as it relates to at least one of those work-life balance factors. And so there's a great deal of work yet to be done. And what the research has shown is that organizational culture can account for a little bit more than half of that, especially the organizational culture that's brought about by those transformational leaders setting the example, sharing when they've been on vacations, encouraging folks to, have a wonderful holiday season and put their, end of year reports away for a while. Those kinds of things go a long way when we hear those from our leaders. And then the rest of it is up to us in a lot of ways. The other part of that culture is how we are responding within our local offices when we're at professional in-services. What I like to share is, what is our water cooler talk? Is it always kind of that defeatist, harried, I'm too busy, I'm too busy, I'm too busy? Or are we willing to step out of our comfort zones and share, I'm looking forward to taking a 2-week vacation to such and such a place, in the weeks ahead, and beginning to, have a little bit more of a positive culture as it relates to this issue. And so with that, I know I've gone through, 100 and some pages in about a half an hour here, and I've certainly not done everything the service that it deserves, but wanted to give you a brief overview today, provide an opportunity for you to ask questions at this point in time. And Nicole, if you see these and I missed them, please let me know, because I may not see all of the questions as they come along. Or folks, you're welcome to unmute as well. Show us your face there if you have interest, and use your voice.
So Tim, when you came up with the questions for this survey and sent out the survey, was there anything that really surprised you, or were you pretty much expecting that, extension agents would say that we don't have a good work-life balance?
Probably the biggest surprise for me was not on the work-life balance side. It was more on the transformational leadership side.
Mm-hmm.
I had gotten a lot of feedback, so I sent the survey out, and then folks would email me kind of their personal stories sometimes, or, they saw me as a safe space to kind of just share some things and ask for advice and whatnot. And one of the pieces I noticed in a lot of those emails is that they felt like their supervisors were really struggling to support them on their work-life balance journeys. So I guess from that, I was kind of skewed originally to thinking that maybe we didn't have supervisors that were as transformational as they needed to be. And the data did not end up showing that. So I see Brock's piece there. One of the things that we have done is I've reached out to or am sharing back, the results with the individual states for them to use, as they see fit. I'll also be sharing, kind of in a little bit more detail, some of this information in journal articles and other conferences coming forward. So hopefully I'll hit some of the folks that, wouldn't have been participants at those places.
Yes, and if you have information or, a link to your dissertation, then we can post that on the website if anyone wants to take a look at that after the webinar. So, another question that I have are what are some things that you've done personally that you've changed? I know you mentioned asking the people that you supervise to make a note of when their vacations will be, but was there anything else that came about after, your work that you changed in your own life?
One of the things I noticed, I came into an extension from a previous career that is known for probably having worse work-life balance than extension folks. So I came into it with my eyes wide open. And one of the strategies I had learned from a supervisor in that other role was to not schedule yourself for a full work week, because inevitably, your other demands are going to take you over. And so early on, I kind of came up with this idea of I was going to try to schedule myself for only 35 hours a week.
Mm-hmm.
And if there was a random week where that ever happened, that I would just go home. If there was not work to be done. And I know that's naive, and that's definitely first year extension thinking. But when I got to the end of the year and I looked at my journal, I noticed that even scheduling myself for 35 hours and not yet really having any statewide programming, relationships, or whatnot, I was already at 43 and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that I have worked very hard at is helping colleagues to reduce, sometimes those legacy programs. One of the things I've done locally is I scaffold my meetings. And I also challenge the groups that are having meetings. Does this meeting need to exist, or are we doing it because we've done it every first Thursday, for the last, 67 years, and you all like to get it, you all enjoy one another's company at Pizza Hut? What's a scaffolded meeting? Great question. So, for example, traditionally we would have evening meetings on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays in our county. And oftentimes you're seeing the same faces at a variety of those different meetings. And so over a period of years, in a way that was respectful to those groups, I would get them to go Monday at 6, and then Monday at 7:30, and then Monday at 9, or whatever the case may be, so that for me, it was a really long night, and I was fried when I was done with it. But it also meant that for my family, I was home 2 more nights that week that I wouldn't have been otherwise. And so just little, kind of tricks like that have worked over the years for me. And again, if you have a specific challenge that you're facing, I'd be happy to work with you offline, and happy to do that.
I think for me, there's this group called Basecamp, and it's a company, and they do a lot with time management, and they've written many articles on it. But one of the tips that they gave that I actually find to be very helpful is that in Extension, we use a lot of shared calendars. And so I noticed that people were scheduling stuff on my calendar and setting up meetings without ever asking me, what's on your plate or what are you working on? And just because my calendar was open, it didn't mean that I wasn't working on a project or creatively into something in my head. So I actually blocked out on my calendar my days for the most part, and now people need to ask. They can see I've got a project that I'm working on, but they need to ask me first before they schedule any type of meeting, because it just kind of felt like I need to be able to have this time to work on things. And so the company Basecamp is completely against shared calendars, which I find to be very interesting.
And that's a challenge, because I know in a number of our universities, it's a requirement of, our positions to make those available to our supervisors and whatnot. One of the things I have done for my people is not make that a thing, probably because I've done this research. And schedule control, the topic of schedule control within, our day-to-day work lives is the highest factor. So it's a component of work-life balance, but it is the most important factor to us as professionals, particularly working for higher education. And so, like you said, when you have those shared calendars and others can put things on there and assume that you're going to make time to be there at that Zoom meeting or whatever the case may be, that really puts us in a bad spot. And it gets again to that culture of kind of that overwork and that busyness, and not respecting that just because someone has a block of time open doesn't mean that they didn't have other things they needed to do at that time. So I appreciate that, Nicole.
So we have a comment in the chat box. Anne says that she blocks out all Mondays, and if she doesn't need to keep them blocked or shown as busy, she leaves them anyway and uses her time how she needs to. So that's a great tip. And then I think Rock had a comment too. We work a lot of weekends, don't always know what weekends that will be, so it's hard to make time because we don't say no enough and take time for ourselves. It's our job, so we just do it. Yep, that's a challenge.
And one of the challenges we're finding right now is organization wide. We're retiring out a generation for which extension has been the identity, right? And there's lots and lots of research showing that. We're replacing it with a generation for which extension is a meaningful career. It's a job. It's something they enjoy and love, but it's not their identity. And so we're facing with our volunteers in particular that, kind of that tug of war where, the old person that used to be in this job, they used to be willing to meet with me after hours at my beck and call. And this new person's making me come into the office between 9 and 5 or whatever the case may be. And it's just recognizing that we're not going to change that broader culture. It's not that one is right and one is wrong or vice versa. It's more that as things evolve, we as an organization need to continue to adapt to that as well. Elizabeth, I appreciate you sharing that there. One of the other tricks that I share with folks is that under no circumstances that are within your control should you ever schedule yourself for more than 2 things per week. And what I mean by that is 2 evening meetings or 1 evening meeting and 1 weekend, event of some kind. Obviously, things come along for many of us, for example, that have 4-H camping or county fair responsibilities. There are certain weeks like that just get thrown out the window because that's the job. But when it's within our own control, I do encourage newer educators to make sure that they're only doing that to themselves, not more than twice a week. I appreciate you sharing that.
Yep, these are all great suggestions and comments. Does anyone else have any questions or comments or tips to share? Okay. Well, we will record the webinar and we're going to post the recording online. I'll send the link out to everyone when it's available. And I'm going to take Tim's advice and I'm not going to do this until next week. So I'm actually going to spend time with my family for Thanksgiving. And then, of course, if any of you have specific follow-up questions or you want to know more about Tim's research, you're welcome to contact Tim. I will post a link to his contact information on the Extension Master Gardener Coordinator website. Any other questions, comments, or tips that you want to share before we end the webinar? Okay. All right. Well, hearing none. Tim, I just want to thank you so much for speaking with us and reminding us how important it is to take time for ourselves and our family and to continuously work on the work-life balance. You've given us some great tips, and I look forward to posting some more information after the webinar.
Thanks again, Nicole. I appreciate being here. It's been a great group to work with.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thanks so much, and I hope everyone has a great Thanksgiving tomorrow. We'll see you in December. Thank you, Tim.
Enjoy the keys.
Thank you. All right. Okay. All right, I'm going to try to pause the recording.